Hi, I'm Elizabeth Curry Chandler. I'm a journalist and writer who, together with my husband, co-founded the website Goodreads, an adventure that completely took over our lives. Today I'm editor-in-chief of Goodreads, and I'm still doing what I've always loved to do, interviewing and writing about creative and dynamic people. For this podcast, I'm talking to the world's most interesting people about what they're reading and why. Support for Books of Your Life comes from Audible, with an unmatched selection of audiobooks in every genre. Start a 30-day trial and your first one is free. Visit audible.com/Goodreads or text Goodreads to 500-500. Abby Falik is the founder and CEO of Global Citizen Year. It's a nonprofit that sends U.S. high school graduates on a gap year to the developing world. Teenagers from all kinds of economic backgrounds are immersed in a local culture. They live with a family, they work, and they learn a new language. Global Citizen Year has only been around for 8 years, but they've already sent more than 700 young people abroad. I asked Abby how her organization came to be. The story begins in childhood, with parents who valued travel as the highest form of education.
My earliest childhood memories are following them to Southern Africa and Southeast Asia, Central America, and they would often take us into small communities or villages where we would have the opportunity to meet other kids our age. And so I would be 8 years old, connecting with a young girl who was my age, but by the luck of the randomness of the birth lottery, had just landed somewhere dramatically different from what I was experiencing growing up in the Bay Area. And it's really hard to unsee or unfeel those early experiences of dramatic inequity. And it gave me a clear sense that I had a deep responsibility to do something with the access and opportunity and education that I was going to have, just by the randomness of where and when I'd been born.
Fast forward to high school. Abby had done everything by the book. She'd gotten good grades and got into college, which is actually where we met. But she says she was missing something, a sense of purpose. So she called the Peace Corps.
I desperately wanted to find a way to spend a year before going on to college without questioning it. And the Peace Corps turned me down because you need a college degree to go to the Peace Corps. And so I went straight to college. I went to Stanford, but with not enough clarity about how I wanted to use my time.
I also didn't want to go to college when I graduated from high school. I really just wanted to take a year and dance because I was a very serious ballet dancer. And there was not a lot of support for that path. And when I arrived at Stanford, I also was pretty mixed up.
And I think the pressures have just gotten worse. And the disconnect is even bigger in terms of what we teach and how, and what skills and abilities are actually most important for a young person to develop.
Well, they say in education now that they don't know what they're teaching kids to be good at because they have no idea what the future is going to look like. It's going to change so rapidly.
And we're still teaching to tests that robots literally can pass.
Yeah.
So how do we focus? I mean, I'm fixated on reorienting education around a core purpose that's to unlock the things that are uniquely human. Because we continue to teach to young people's sort of ability to memorize and regurgitate. And this is at a time when any kid in a lecture hall has a smartphone in their pocket and they can look up the world's knowledge, with a couple of clicks. So what is the purpose of an education in this context? And it has to be about developing empathy, creativity, compassion, the things that AI and robots will never be able to do.
Okay, so let's talk about books.
Okay, I love to read.
So, as you know, I've known you for a long time, Abby. I've always admired your work ethic, spirit, and what you've done with Global Citizen Year. So I have been very interested in the books you read, and I've read quite a few that you've recommended to me at this point. Why don't we talk about When Breath Becomes Air? When Breath Becomes Air is a memoir of Paul Kalanithe's life, beginning with his childhood, tracing his path to becoming a neurosurgeon, and throughout the remainder of his life after he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer at age 36.
So, Elizabeth, when you prompted you asked me to think about a book that had really changed my life in some way. And this book in my first reading of it and in subsequent readings of it, because I'm now making it a habit to revisit it often, is enormously powerful in reminding me of how precious and short our lives are, which can sound trite. I think one of the things that connects me to this book in particular is that Paul, also known as Pubby, was somebody that we both knew. So he was the RA in a house we lived in when we were in college. And I remember his spirit, and I remember his smile, and I remember his smarts. And then I remember many years after college reading a column he'd written in the New York Times about his diagnosis with lung cancer as a rising star neurosurgeon himself, and what it felt like to suddenly be the patient after having been the physician for so many years. And it struck me when I read the article, because I hadn't kept up with him, but here was somebody writing beautifully who I had had a relationship with, and who was now sick with a ticking clock, and was really clear-eyed about his prognosis, which was not good from the beginning, and was able to describe how thin, how razor thin that veil is between health and sickness, and between physician and patient. And so I remember logging into Amazon and pre-ordering the book that hadn't yet come out, which became When Breath Becomes Air. And the piece that actually stayed with me the most fiercely was the epilogue that was written by his wife, now widow, Lucy.
Why don't we listen to a bit of that epilogue?
Often I return to the grave after leaving flowers, tulips, lilies, carnations, to find the heads eaten by deer. It's just as good a use for the flowers as any, and one Paul would have liked. The earth is quickly turned over by worms, the processes of nature marching on, reminding me of what Paul saw and what I now carry deep in my bones too. The inextricability of life and death, and the ability to cope, to find meaning despite this, because of this.
I think for me, the abruptness of the ending was also something that really struck me hard, because, as you said, we knew him, and he was just one of the kindest, sunniest, filled with light kind of person. And he was so brilliant. I mean, you read that in every sentence that he's written, and yet he didn't get to do everything he planned to do. And it just reminds you, the way the book sort of trails off at the end, that you just never know. I liked that he said one of his quotes was, "Everything succumbs to finitude. I suspect I'm not the only one who reaches this pluperfect state. Most ambitions are either achieved or abandoned. Either way, they belong to the past. The future, instead of the ladder toward the goals of life, flattens out into a perpetual present. Money, status, all the vanities the preacher of Ecclesiastes described hold so little interest, chasing after wind indeed." And, it just makes you rethink your goals, your priorities, and your sense of time.
Yeah. I mean, there's clearly special resonance with somebody who was young and healthy, and somebody we knew, and somebody with a young family, where it's just such a powerful reminder of the importance of remembering to carry our deaths with us. I mean, we are all living while we are dying. And the closer I can get to remembering that, and remembering that truth, the more alive I'm able to be in my life.
Now let's talk a little bit about another one of your recommendations, How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia by Mohsin Hamid. He's the author of Exit West and The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And to me, this is an incredible story of one man's rise from extreme poverty in a rural area to the big city life, and he's a water tycoon. It's written in the second person, and it's a clever take on the self-help book.
So you had asked originally, what's a book that was a guilty pleasure or that you were sort of embarrassed to have read? And this was the first thing that came to mind because the title is funny. And I think the power of the use of the second person, where essentially it invites the reader to walk in the shoes of a young man who's born into extreme poverty in India, where the description of what life looks and feels like could be a description that we associate with life many centuries ago. And through the course of the book, as he moves into the city and actually describes the experience of riding on the bus, passing through millennia from one to the next to get to the city, you actually realize that the book is taking place in modern day life with the cell phones and computers. And it's this stark and important reminder of the juxtaposition of lives that are being led simultaneously on Earth today. But it's the arc of a life where it builds empathy because you're seeing it through the protagonist's direct lived experience. But it also calls into question a lot of assumptions that we have about progress and success.
For me, that book is so moving. It's quite emotional in the end.
Mm-hmm.
It starts out instructive in a way, and you feel that emotion of beginning this great, exciting journey, like the beginning of a movie almost. Then at the end, I found, even though I did not grow up in rural Pakistan and, take this pursuit in my life, there's so much that you can relate to about it. So much about the parent-child relationship really just pulled at my heart. I remember that he described how there's that agony a parent feels toward their children because the love just flows downward, almost like gravity. And I remember there's a quote that I really felt strongly about that I'll share, which is, "It's the first visit in many years for your son, finally a citizen of his new country and free to travel, and you try to suppress your undercurrent of resentment at his decision to absent himself from your presence in so devastatingly severe a manner. You feel a love you know you will never be able to adequately explain or express to him, a love that flows one way down the generations, not in reverse, and is understood and reciprocated only when time has made of a younger generation an older one."
Yeah, it just really hits deeply. And I think you can zoom out and see this as sort of a story of progress and each successive generation sort of breaking out of a cycle of extreme poverty, and then the protagonist, who is us in reading it, the son then, breaks out a level further and lands in America. But it just forces a questioning of what is a rich life?
Yeah.
What brings meaning to our lives?
Yeah. So let's talk about The Art of Stillness by Pico Eiler, because you recommended this one quite late in the game to me, and I stayed up all night reading it.
Oh, good. It's not too long.
No, it's nice and short, but gets the message across.
Yeah. I think Pico is just brilliantly gifted with language. So he always has the right words. And he speaks quickly and he moves quickly. And yet this book, The Art of Stillness, is about how he has managed to cultivate an inner stability, how he spent the first half of his life traveling quickly around the world, and sort of sees that the second half of his life is about exploring the inner terrain, and that is as exotic and vast and fascinating to him as anything he ever explored externally. And so there's something in that intersection to me of the external and the internal, and what draws our attention at different stages of life, and it's deeply connected to the work I do with 18-year-olds who, if we can wake them up to the fact that there is both an inner world and an outer world, and that they live at that interface. In many ways, Global Citizen Year is about giving them an experience of both of those things simultaneously.
Do you think it's because you send them to places that have a quieter life sometimes, that they have more opportunity to look inward?
I don't know that it's a quieter life. I think of, visiting a fellow in a village in Senegal where the radios are blaring and the sound from the mosque and the animals and the chaos of 15 cousins running around the compound. So it's busy and full and noisy, but it is less plugged into technology, that's for sure. And when you arrive in a place that is foreign to you, where you are, you don't yet speak the language, you don't know the local customs, you are forced to see yourself through others' eyes, and you are also forced into quietness in a way that you probably haven't yet experienced.
That's interesting too, because especially when you're younger, so much of your identity is shaped by your peers and what your parents have decided you are like. And to take that scaffolding away, you just have yourself.
Who are we when we're not the story we've been told of ourselves, the expectations our parents have had, the image we've conveyed on social media, especially for the current generation? And so the opportunity to kind of strip that down back to basics. And I think that's so much of what Pico Iyer gets at when he talks about retreating into stillness and into silence.
Do you have a quote you want to read from the book?
I do actually. And I think this actually connects with How to Get Filthy Rich, in a sense, which is, so Pico Iyer describing sort of one of his early experiences of silent retreat. And he said, as I came down from the mountain, I recalled how, not many years ago, it was access to information and movement that seemed our greatest luxury. Nowadays, it's often freedom for information, the chance to sit still that feels like the ultimate prize. Stillness is not just an indulgence for those with enough resources. It's a necessity for anyone who wishes to gather less visible resources. There's a whole chapter in this book about the idea of a secular Sabbath and the importance in our harried and technologically plugged-in lives of reclaiming a day a week as separate and different from the habitual patterns we have. So for many years, I've taken Saturdays unplugged, and I almost feel like I am now more productive in the rest of my life by carving out a time to unplug and rest than I am if I just kind of keep going on autopilot.
I find it takes longer than just a day. So we went camping a few weekends ago, and the first day I could feel myself wound tightly. There was no cell phone reception, so it was basically a forced
secular Sabbath.
Yes. And it took me about a day and a half before I really felt it sink in, which is frightening. I noticed there was a quote in his book where he said it takes, I have it here. He said, researchers in the new field of interruption science have found that it takes an average of 25 minutes to recover from a phone call. Yet such interruptions come every 11 minutes, which means we're never caught up with our lives. And I don't know about you, but I like to accidentally, on purpose, lose my phone from time to time, which drives members of my family crazy, but it offers me a respite from the relentless onslaught of information, of people telling me things or wanting things.
Well, it's so the new luxury is unplugging. It's the resorts that charge more because there's no wireless internet. But I think it's also reaching a cultural moment where the people who have developed these technologies, who, by the way, are the first to prohibit them in their households, and to send their kids to Waldorf schools where there is no computer or iPad, it's telling that we've reached a point where the sort of next frontier is in better mediating our relationship to the technology, because there's no longer any question that it's playing to our human weakness and addictive instincts,
our vanity,
and at some level, it's actually not in our control to find the discipline. I think we can all beat ourselves up that we don't have a better relationship with our phone. But I actually think that it's the, small group of people sitting in the control towers of the attention economy, manipulating our attention, who have the deep responsibility to figure out, how are we going to save ourselves from ourselves?
Yeah, and these are the smartest people in, some of the smartest minds in our country, spending all their time trying to figure out how to make their technology more addictive and just playing your emotions like a piano.
Yeah. I mean, my hope is that we have reached a breaking point, and I am optimistic that we will outsmart this issue, that we're just sort of in our pre-adolescence of how to relate to our technology, but in a way that it can be life-giving and not life depleting.
I really hope for our kids when they get a little bit older that we'll
convinced.
be in
we'll
better
be in
shape.
we will be. We have to be. I know we will be. And there's a real connection here, and there's a thread for me about building in transitions, building in pauses, setting aside whether it's a day a week, a year, or a year of your life, to leave your comfort zone and leave your habits and patterns, to remember to not sleepwalk through our lives. And in so many ways, the work that drives me and the work we do at Global Citizen here is about giving a young person that experience that says you have agency. You can step off what might feel like a moving conveyor belt, but is actually a path of your own creation. You can take this year and figure out what brings you to life. And then you can come back to your life refreshed and clear-eyed about who you are and what you care about and what your compass is going to be. Even if you don't know, the step-by-step of the map, you have a sense of purpose and direction.
Abby, thanks so much for being here. It's always a treat to get to talk to you and learn about what you're doing. You're an inspiration to me.
Thank you so much.
Books of Your Life is produced by me, Elizabeth, with Melissa Yeager-Miller. Our theme was composed by the amazing Mia Schettino. Our engineer was Brendan Glasson, with help from Will Rogers and Craig Billmeyer. You can find the podcast and all the books we discussed on Goodreads in the book group, Books of Your Life with Elizabeth. You can also connect with your fellow readers there. Audiobooks from Audible are a great way to get more books in your life. With the free Audible app, you can listen while commuting, doing chores, working out, anytime, anywhere, on any device. Audible's unmatched selection includes my guest Abby Falik's recommendation, When Breath Becomes Air. Get it free along with 2 selected Audible original titles when you start a 30-day trial or choose any other audiobook. To get started, just visit audible.com/Goodreads or text Goodreads to 500-500.